From farmers protecting the world's bananas from a lethal fungus, to the company processing millions of limes using orange trees, we traveled the globe to learn about the innovative ways farmers are keeping our food species alive. Our first stop is Mexico, where one mezcal-making family grows its agave from seeds to protect against diseases. While mezcal and tequila are both made from agave plants, mezcal actually predates tequila and has a distinct smoky flavor. Mezcal gets its name from the Aztec word mezcali, meaning agave roasted in the oven, but it's nicknamed the elixir of the gods. Because, as the legend goes, in pre-Colombian Mexico, a lightning bolt hit an agave plant, creating mezcal. For most of mezcal's history, it was a drink of the lower class.
Que era una bebida de pobres, de campesinos, de gente no educada.
Graciela's family has made mezcal in the town of Santa Catarina, Minas since 1898. But unlike her ancestors, she grows her agave, or maguey as it's known locally, from seeds.
Es como un cascabel. Y así es como aparecen las semillas.
While other companies may prefer root cuttings to speed up the process, Graciela uses this slower method so the agave can stand up better to diseases.
Son plantas de un ciclo largo y que solo podemos aprovechar una vez en su vida.
After anywhere from 7 to 35 years, the agave is ready to be harvested, all by hand.
Quizás los expertos lo hacen como en unos 15 minutos. ¿Sale, Goyo? Al ataque.
First, they remove the leaves. Then they slice off the thorns on the tip and side of each leaf. Because if those thorns accidentally get under your skin, Graciela's brother says they can migrate, which hurts a lot.
Acá, en esta parte de acá tengo muchas enterradas. Se cree en la época prehispánica que esto usaban para un tema de castigo a ladrones.
Saponins, the chemicals agave leaves excrete, can also be dangerous.
Genera ardor, dolor, o en la piel, pues comezón, y te genera granos.
But Edgar says the saponins don't bother him.
Yo soy moreno. A las personas de piel blanca les hace más daño que a los morenos. Es la ventaja de ser moreno.
What's left is the agave heart, called the piña, and it takes a ton of effort to unearth it.
Se regresa uno bien cansado, lleno de ronchas, espinado.
Piñas can weigh hundreds of pounds. So workers break them up to make it easier to carry, then haul them onto an awaiting truck bed. But it's still weeks away from becoming mezcal. Remember that earthen oven? Well, the agave hearts first have to get cooked.
Cuando se cocine va a ser muy dulce.
Building the oven is an art form passed down for generations. Workers place stones on top of firewood. The rocks are exposed to a 2,000-degree fire for up to 9 hours, so they get red hot.
Posteriormente pusimos sobre esas piedras calientes fibra de agave o guarapi, ¿no? Que es el resultado de la destilación, es el desecho del proceso. Eso se humedece y se hace una capa que es como un aislante para evitar que el maguey toque directamente la piedra, porque si la toca, se quema.
They load the agave hearts on top, big ones first and small ones to follow. They kick and shove each piña into place.
Entre todos están observando cómo arman ese rompecabezas, ¿no?
Next, they shovel more fiber waste on top. Then 2 men toss a canvas over the whole thing. And finally, a layer of soil finishes up the oven, trapping the heat inside.
Cuando ya tuvimos casi toda la tierra arriba, Edgar puso agua y vieron que salió con una potencia como si fuera un volcán. Si tú no acomodas bien el maguey, cuando se pone el agua, se te desbarata, se cae toda la tierra.
A cross is placed on top to bless the batch.
Ahí, en el horno va a permanecer por 5 días.
What's inside the oven smolders slowly, giving mezcal its distinct smoky flavor. For the next step, we head to another distillery called Tres Mezquites, an hour east in San Baltasar, Guadalvilla. Here, Don Goyo has been making mezcal for 40 years. Today, his business pumps out 6,000 liters a year.
Siempre le echo 2 copas por la mañana antes del desayuno.
He and his team move the cooked agave hearts into this molino, or grinder. To crush the agave, a horse pulls this stone, which weighs a whopping 1,000 pounds.
El caballo se llama Satanás. Porque, bueno, ahorita pues el caballo es mansito pues porque él tiene 22 años que está trabajando. Si no más antes, cuando era joven, el caballo está bien arizo. No se deja que otra gente le toca. Lo único el que me deja, pues yo soy.
Don Goyo's team uses pitchforks to move the crushed agave fibers into fermentation tanks. Back at Graciela's, they add water to dissolve the sugar. Naturally occurring yeast gets to work eating the sugar and converting it into alcohol. After it ferments for nearly a week, Edgar comes in to check on it.
Entonces hay que levantar primero esto. Ahorita van a salir unos mosquitos que le llamamos mosquitos borrachos. Son nuestros amigos. Les gusta estar entre el alcohol.
He first listens to make sure there's no sound of escaping CO2 bubbles coming from the vat, which could sound something like this.
Ritmo de la fermentación. Si es muy lento, casi está. Y si casi es nulo, ya está listo.
Then he submerges his tester tube.
Se llama probador, es un carrizo que tiene un orificio y tiene que saber a cerveza, sí, cerveza fuerte, como una cerveza negra, como una amarga, sí, pero con alcohol, pues, ¿no? No, todavía les va a faltar mucho. Hoy es día miércoles. Yo le calculo que entre el sábado y domingo lo estaríamos destilando.
When it's ready to be distilled, workers rake the fibers into the stills and add more water. From each barrel, they get about 100 liters of mezcal. The distilling area is known as the palenque. As the agave fibers heat up, the alcohol vapor rises. It travels through this tube, condenses, and drops into an awaiting jug. They'll distill it a second time to get 4 jugs. The first is called the head, and its alcohol content is really high. The next jug is known as the body and has a little less alcohol. The third is the tail, with even less.
Y lo que envasamos como mezcal es el cuerpo. La cola actualmente la utilizamos para enjuagar nuestras botellas.
And finally, the last jug is an acidic residue called enguiche, used to clean the floors. Graciela's team fills 8,000 bottles a year. She sells her brand Real Minero within Mexico and exports it to the US and Europe. But it wasn't until the 2010s that mezcal began seeing interest outside Oaxaca. It popped up in trendy bars in the US and beyond. In response, Mexico's mezcal production jumped 400% in the 6 years leading up to 2020. By then, the US overtook Mexico as the biggest market for mezcal. What was once a poor man's drink had reached global fame.
Y es una carrera que no paró ni siquiera en la pandemia, ¿no? Porque en la pandemia pareciera ser que en vez de bajar, aumentó.
To standardize and regulate the growing industry, the Mexican government got involved. It started in 1994, when the government established a denominación de origen for mezcal, kind of like how champagne can only come from a specific region in France. It was to protect the traditional process of making mezcal and the place where it's made.
Es algo que es muy bueno desde el punto de vista que el consumidor va a tener una certeza de que es un producto que va respaldado.
In 1997, the government appointed an organization now called Comarcom to oversee and enforce the rules for certification. Rules like mezcal had to be made from 100% agave in only these 9 states, and it had to have a certain amount of alcohol by volume and methanol. The DO seemed like a great idea to guarantee quality standards across Mexico and keep production inside the country. And at first, even mezcal producers advocated for it. Those new regulations eventually came with a catch. Today, to get certified, producers now have to have time and a lot of money. Mexican lawyer Blanca Salvador says certification can cost anywhere from $375 to $2,500, which is a lot for a small mezcalero like Don Goyo. And the costs don't stop there. Producers have to pay to get their mezcal lab tested and buy all the required equipment.
Entonces no tienen a veces el recurso para eso. Entonces si no lo tienen, no van a pasar la prueba de lo que es la certificación.
And the whole certification process can take over a year.
¿Y qué pasa si nos negaron la marca? Perdimos 6 u 8 meses en poder tener una marca, y si no tenemos una marca, no podemos nosotros vender el mezcal.
For years, going through Comercom was the only way to get a certification. In 2020, claims of corruption came to light, and the Mexican government fined the organization nearly $50,000 for deceptive and abusive practices, like prioritizing big mezcal companies over small ones. But now, producers fear the DO rules are putting traditions at risk. For one, it's really hard to get a consistent alcohol and methanol content in traditional distilling. So a few large-scale producers have turned to more modern equipment, like steel stills, to guarantee alcohol and methanol. Another concern? Changing name standards for agave, despite generations of indigenous groups using native words for the plant. When Comercom told Graciela to drop the ancestral name of Quiche on her labels for Mexicano, it was her last straw. So in 2021, she and her family decided to stop certifying their brand, even though their distillation process didn't change.
Porque se vuelve un tema burocrático, un tema político. Y entonces no nos gustó, por eso nos salimos.
Choosing family tradition over regulation, Graciela labeled everything distilled agave.
No dice mezcal, pero es un mezcal.
And other distilleries followed suit. But there's another problem. All that demand has drawn interest from international companies. It's created more competition on top of an already tough certification process. Of these popular brands, none are Mexican-owned. A French company owns Del Maguey, a British company owns Casamigos, and a New York-based company funded El Silencio Mezcal. Even celebrities like George Clooney, Adam Levine, and the stars of Breaking Bad have gotten in on the market. Because of the DO's protection, American companies can't make mezcal in the US. But they are allowed to buy loads of it from Mexican producers, repackage, and resell it for a lot more than what they paid. This system has left traditional producers, even certified ones like Don Goyo, with a dwindling piece of the booming global industry.
No tengo marca porque, me falta ¿cómo se llama? Del dinero, pues, para ponerle marca.
So he sells his mezcal in label-less plastic bottles to a middleman. Don Goyo earns $15 to $40 per bottle. Casa Cortez, one of the brands that eventually buys Don Goyo's mezcal, resells it for $38 to $100 a bottle.
Compran menos y después ellos lo duplican, pues.
But these ancestral mezcaleros haven't given up hope in their craft.
Lo primero que desearía es que los mezcaleros logremos entender que la palabra no le pertenece solo a algunos, que es una palabra que nos pertenece a todos los mexicanos.
Nowadays, the government has added more certifying agencies to lighten the load of Comercom. But Blanca thinks it should do more to help producers bottle their own mezcal and streamline the certification process.
Debe, desde mi punto de vista, agilizar los trámites para poderle permitir a los productores pequeños estar en la posibilidad de competir a nivel internacional.
On Graciela's side, she believes the key lies in respecting the agave plant itself.
Me encantaría que todos los que producen mezcal en este país comiencen a realizar acciones para conservar el maguey. Porque si no hay maguey, no hay mezcal. ¿Y entonces de qué sirve el éxito?
Mezcaleros also hope to keep putting tradition first.
Ahora sí que testigos de la intensa lucha que se ha desarrollado para preservar, para conservar, ahora sí que la industria artesanal.
A tradition you can see here, Before taking a sip of a new bottle, Don Goyo pours a bit out, thanking the land for its ancient gift of mezcal.
Entonces, bendiciones para todos los mezcaleros, para todos los maguilleros y para todos los campesinos en general, que pues entregan día a día pues cada gota de sudor, cada esfuerzo que ahora sí que con mucha pasión y entrega pues hacen a que esta industria pequeña pero importante pues sea posible.
Next, we visit a farm in Colombia to learn how they're protecting the world's bananas from a lethal fungus. The world's most popular banana may be on the verge of extinction.
Similar to humans, bananas are also facing a pandemic.
99% of bananas exported to developed countries are just one group, called the Cavendish. And the Cavendish is vulnerable to tropical race 4, or Panama disease, a fungus that's now ravaging banana farms across the globe.
So now you can compare this is tropical race 4 and a Cavendish banana, then the plant looks very healthy.
One scientist recently developed a line of Cavendish that is resistant to TR4, but it was genetically modified.
In Europe, the GMs are under regulation, so we cannot use it.
So scientists like Fernando had to start from scratch to find a solution, and they're working against the clock. Because if TR4 is not stopped,
it would wipe out Cavendish.
And it's already happening.
Este es un área de foco, una tasa de 1.640 plantas por hectárea, podemos estar en 500 plantas en este foco. No existe la bala de plata, hay que atacarlo desde diferentes frentes porque no existe otra manera de poder contenerlo y limitarlo a esta zona.
Globally, we're facing the collapse of a $25 billion Cavendish industry. So how did we get here? And can we save one of the world's most consumed fruits before it's too late? You probably know the Cavendish banana.
You can find this type of banana in every supermarket around the world.
They're so popular because they're yummy, they look nice, and they ripen as they transport.
It's high yielding, so it's got quite a thick skin, and so travels well and tastes pretty good. Comes in its own package.
But there's a problem.
They are sterile, they don't have seeds.
No seeds means Cavendish bananas are clones of each other. So the only way to propagate them is in vitro, or by taking new growths called suckers from the base of an older plant. But since they're all genetic copies, Cavendish are really vulnerable to disease.
The domino effect, if you have everything wrong with just one clone, one disease can kill everything, plant by plant.
That's exactly what's happening with TR4, one of the deadliest plant diseases out there. The fungus doesn't spread to humans, but it does eventually kill the banana plant, so no more fruit grows. Scientists guess the fungus probably started somewhere in Southeast Asia in the 90s and quickly spread across the globe. Then in 2019, it hit Latin America. Combined with the Caribbean, that area grows 75% of the world's bananas.
Primero una reacción de mucho de impacto porque el fusario no estaba ni cerca en el continente y de repente aparece en nuestro departamento, en el departamento de La Guajira, en uno de los departamentos más importantes de producción bananera.
To make sure the fungus doesn't spread, farms across Colombia have implemented biosecurity measures. Eva Norte 2 was one of the first farms in the country to detect TR4. Workers wash down and disinfect the underside of any car that comes in, just in case there's infected soil hiding in the treads.
Entonces cualquier parte de nuestra indumentaria que entre en contacto con suelo puede convertirse en un factor de dispersión. Los zapatos los ubica en esta zona, se gira, se pone el overol y se colocan las botas de caucho con que va a ingresar al predio. El calzado es único, esto se considera zona sucia y esto es zona limpia. Zona limpia porque es la que está bajo el control de la desinfección que está de la salida hacia la finca.
Antonio's team built cement paths throughout the farm. So on their way to harvest, workers aren't walking on open soil.
Y hemos visto drásticamente cómo se reduce la cantidad de suelo que se adhiera a las botas.
Once they've reached the area ready to be harvested, workers walk through a sanitizing footbath made of ammonium.
En promedio aquí en La Guajira un pediluvio cubre entre 35 a 40 hectáreas. Donde hay focos, en esas zonas colocamos pediluvios adicionales para cubrir la entrada y la salida de esas áreas de foco.
Out in the field, workers measure the banana fingers to make sure they're ready to harvest. They're usually ready about 12 to 13 weeks after the fruit stem shows up. One worker cuts down a 65-pound bundle, while the other catches it and carries it to the cableway. That cableway system brings all those banana bunches to the packaging plant. First, workers sanitize the bunches with chlorine.
Con el fin de retirar cualquier insecto que pueda venir del campo dentro de la fruta, como en el caso de arañas.
Then they check the bananas for quality and any signs of fusarium damage. They cut off and throw bushels into a huge tank. That bath not only preserves the bananas, but washes off any of the latex that naturally occurs on the peel. The bananas get cut into smaller bunches of 5 to 7.
Posterior a eso viene la parte de sellado, cubierta de coronas para el tema de protección para el viaje.
Next come those famous stickers.
Pasa a la etapa de pesado de la bandeja y por último está el área de empaque.
Workers wrap the banana carefully so they don't bruise. That wrapping has holes in it so the bananas can ripen as they travel. No more than 4 hours after the bananas are harvested, those boxes end up on pallets, loaded onto trucks.
En este caso, para el día de hoy tenemos 960 cajas de bandeja 3 libras y 960 cajas de Walmart.
The bananas are trucked to the nearby port, where they're moved onto ships. This shipment's headed to the U.S. With equipment, bananas, and people moving along this global supply chain, it's easy to see how the fungus could spread. If TR4 does sneak into a farm, the Colombian government has laid out strict guidelines for containing the fungus.
En este sitio donde estamos hay una intervención que se realizó en la semana 26 del año 2019, donde este es el segundo caso de la finca de Banorte 2.
That means they've found symptoms like
The yellowing of the leaves, the splitting of the stem.
Once TR4 is identified in a plant, you can't just kill that one plant. The fungus goes about 10 feet deep into the soil.
Once the pathogen is in the soil, it's almost impossible to eradicate.
So you have to kill off all the plants in that area.
Nosotros en área productiva pues que hemos tenido que erradicar están alrededor de 137 hectáreas. Son las que en su momento que fueron eliminadas por la presencia de esa planta sospechosa o esa planta positiva para Fusarium.
To keep operating the rest of the farm, Evan Norte 2 followed the government's 3-zone plan.
Una que es la zona A, la zona roja, que es en la zona más cercana a la planta con síntomas. Se hacen las labores de inyección.
The injected herbicide kills all the plants in Zone A.
Y adicionalmente a eso se les aplica unos tratamientos de aplicación de urea y se cubre con carpa.
That tarps so birds won't land on the fungus and spread it around. There are also canals around the zone to keep any water away from the infected area. In Zone B, called the buffer zone,
que también se inyectan todas las plantas con el fin de como una barrera entre esa zona y la zona de cultivo.
Finally, in Zone C, plants are allowed to grow, but they're constantly monitored for signs of TR4. Jose estimates biosecurity has cost this farm as much as $5 million since 2019. So they're pricey, but the measures are working at keeping the fungus at bay.
En todo el tema de contención, el Magdalena y el Cesar son departamentos libres de Fusarium raza 4 tropical en este momento.
No hay baja en el tema de productividad hasta la fecha.
These biosecurity measures have contained the fungus in Colombia and kept it from spreading to Ecuador, the largest exporter of bananas in the world. But fungus can wipe out an entire fruit variety if not stopped. We know because it's happened before. In the early 1900s, a banana called Gros Michel was the most popular. But by the 1950s,
one strain of the Panama disease wiped out the whole production of Gros Michel.
Luckily, Cavendish was resistant to that first strain, so it took over as the banana of choice. The problem was banana companies built their entire supply chains around this one Cavendish variety. In 2019, they exported 20 million bananas and supported millions of jobs globally. But now, the Cavendish is also vulnerable.
The history repeats itself now, with the tropical race 4 and the Cavendish.
Cooking bananas like plantains are also at risk for TR4.
A risk for food security because the plantains are staple food in Latin America, in Africa, and many other countries. They are part of our daily diet.
So yeah, the newest race of Fusarium is scary for both Cavendish and plantains. But this time around, we have advanced science. Researchers across the globe are working toward one goal.
Es buscar materiales que sean resistentes a raza 4 tropical.
This guy actually invented a banana that did just that. Back in 2019, Dr. James Dale announced that his team had successfully injected the DNA from a resistant banana into a Cavendish, and it worked.
We found the solution. We have a line of Cavendish which appears to be completely resistant to TR4. The thing we haven't done yet is a taste test, and that's because they're GM. They look, smell, feel exactly the same as every other banana. We've only changed one gene.
But no one would buy his miracle banana because it was genetically modified.
A nivel internacional, las variedades modificadas genéticamente no son una solución ni siquiera tanto por el consumidor como por el comprador, como los que compran la fruta no aceptan.
In the EU, most member countries have either partly or fully banned GMOs. In the US, they're allowed but feared. One argument against GMOs is that these modified plants would quickly spread their genes and kill out biodiversity. But with bananas, that's not a problem.
The genes don't move because they are sterile. You can grow a GM banana next to a non-GM banana for 50 years and the gene will not move from one to the other. Incredibly frustrating. There's the solution, but it's a scientific solution, but not a political solution.
So scientists had to go back to the drawing board, using what they learned from James to play the non-GMO game. Fernando is a breeder for Keygene, a genetics company in the Netherlands. And he thinks the best way to get around GMO regulations is through traditional breeding, meaning you take two different types of bananas, the Cavendish and one that is resistant, and you essentially have them mate. And their kid is hopefully resistant to Panama disease, but still tastes good, like Cavendish.
Crossbreeding or traditional breeding is something that happens every day in nature. So the bees are pollinating the different flowers with other flowers. So that's what we are doing here. We are acting as bees.
Fernando has found a few resistant bananas to cross with Cavendish, but
most of them are not even edible bananas, are the bananas that are full of seeds, like these ones.
And to cross those with a Cavendish is hard.
They are sterile, very difficult to breed. It's not impossible. So you can try to cross, but you need to do it many times to get only a few seeds.
For James to make that first GMO banana, it took him
nearly 10 years since our first field trial.
For those future bananas that are traditionally bred, it'll take just as long.
It will take lots of years because the life cycle of the banana is quite slow.
But the longer it takes to traditionally breed a resistant Cavendish, the more the disease spreads, and the more strains of Fusarium could be released. Fernando says there's a bigger picture way to attack this problem: diversity. Take tomatoes, for example. You go to the grocery store and there may be 10 or more different types of tomatoes. Cherry, vine, beef, Roma. That's diversity. So if one tomato gets in trouble, it won't be a huge loss. Fernando and his colleagues have the same vision for bananas.
We have red bananas, pink bananas. Why not try to incorporate that into the market so that you can go to the supermarket and have a complete bench of different options of bananas that you can choose.
There are hundreds of different banana varieties around the world. A friend of mine collected one up in Papua New Guinea that he said, if you didn't know it, you'd think you're eating a strawberry. Now, so amazingly different flavors.
And diversity would also help farms.
But if you have different types of bananas grown together, probably one banana will be more resistant than the next one. So that one can stop the spreading of the disease to the next plant.
So why haven't companies diversified? Because it's too expensive and complicated to change a $25 billion industry built around a monoculture. So until a solution is found, these biosecurity measures will have to be the short-term fix for keeping the big business of bananas alive.
Es un antes y un después, el Fusarium. Muchas lecciones nos hizo abrir los ojos sobre muchas necesidades que tenía el sector que no visibilizábamos.
Back in Mexico, we learn how farmers use orange seeds to grow and harvest millions of limes. About 45 lime producers are spread across Martínez de la Torre, Veracruz. They grow Persian limes, the seedless kind.
Muy importante porque se utiliza en la mayoría de los platillos.
Persian limes love the wet climate here.
La verdad es que estamos en una zona tropical, con bastante calor.
But in recent years, the area has faced increasingly extreme weather. So how then do they grow strong enough lime trees even without seeds? Well, believe it or not, they start with orange seeds. They take a mature orange stalk and a bud from a lime plant and use a grafting technique to combine them.
Literalmente se pega esa yema a la planta, se hace una venda con un nylon.
While it grows, workers cut away any leaves that aren't lime, basically convincing this orange plant that it's a lime one. Orange rootstocks like this are hardier, so when it's mature, the fusion lime plant will better stand up to diseases and climate change. After about a year,
esta planta ya está lista para salir a campo y ser sembrada. Cuando ya tiene a partir de 2 o en este caso ya 3 ramitas, ya está.
But the hard work doesn't stop there.
Yo considero que son las plagas y las enfermedades, que es lo que tenemos que estar constantemente monitoreando.
In 2014, lime farms across Mexico saw a huge drop in production because of a plant-killing disease called HLB, or citrus greening. Insects transmit a type of bacteria that starves the trees of nutrients, causing it to produce less fruit. So how did they keep producing millions of limes with these insects on the loose? Well, teams here discovered they could control HLB and a disease called wood pocket using mesh netting and insecticide.
Pues sería rápidamente monitorear todas las plantas, asegurarnos que hay presencia como tal en la planta y realizar aplicaciones. Pues es de suma importancia porque ahora sí esto es lo que nos garantiza tener una planta segura al momento de llevarla al campo.
It takes about 4 years for the tree to bear fruit. One tree can produce about 150 pounds of limes per year. This picker has been harvesting here for 2 years. Like him, most everyone working on the farm is from the state.
Ya lo que está más grande, si se ve que está tiernitos, pues.
But in the last 5 years, limes haven't always looked like this. Veracruz farmers have faced a growing number of floods, freezes, and high winds.
La planta de limón es muy sensible al tema del clima.
In very dry conditions, the lime skin is too smooth and may turn yellow. If conditions are too wet, the tree will drown, causing the fruit's peel to split. When it's really windy, branches hit the fruit.
Le hacen como una herida y después esa herida cicatriza formando estas lacras.
This extreme weather was part of what caused a lime shortage that began in 2021, driving prices up 300% by January 2022.
Es un cultivo muy sensible, el cual nos requiere mucha atención, ¿sí? Constantemente, y eso implica hacer ajustes en el plan de trabajo agronómico de acuerdo a ciertos fenómenos que pudieran llegarse a presentar.
Still, Veracruz has been spared the worst of these shifting weather patterns. Farmers here hope that grafting will be their tree's lifeline, if that time does come. In the fields, workers tug off ripe limes and drop them into these traditional ayate bags, woven from agave leaves. Workers can harvest about 2,000 limes in a day. They load them onto trucks headed to the packaging facility.
Empezamos nuestro proceso con el área de vaciado.
This machine dumps limes onto the processing line. Each one gets washed with a detergent disinfectant.
Para retirar cualquier tipo de suciedad, polvo que pueda traer de campo la fruta.
And hit with a spray of palm wax. It's not just to make the limes look shiny.
Fruta es para poner como una capa sobre la fruta que le va a ayudar a su vida de anaquel o a que la fruta tenga una mayor vida, pues que no se deshidrate y que no se madure tan pronto.
Throughout their journey in the factory, the limes will get sorted multiple times. Some stations do it by hand, others with fancy tech.
Nuestra máquina consta de un sistema operativo el cual toma de 20 a 40 fotos a cada fruta que va pasando.
Using those pictures, the machine separated them based on their size. Ones that aren't the right size will go directly to Mexico's juicing industry. The perfectly sized ones will head on to get exported. But first, there's quality control.
Este limón es para exportación a Estados Unidos. Tenemos un limón con una buena cáscara, un buen color, un color uniforme y si lo partimos o lo abrimos, tenemos una buena cantidad de jugo.
After they pass this final test, the limes are ready for packaging and shipping. The majority of the limes produced in this region end up in the United States. Demand for limes has been increasing for decades as Latin American and Asian cuisines became more popular. But in 1994, after a new free trade agreement went into effect, the floodgates for Mexican limes opened. Now, the US is the biggest importer of limes globally, doubling the amount it purchased from Mexico in the last 10 years. To keep up with demand, Mexico increased its production 50% in the same decade. Workers here say that demand is a double-edged sword. On one hand,
El limón es el sustento de miles de hogares, de muchas personas, de muchas empresas y de importación, de exportación de materias primas, fertilizantes. Entonces, esto da comida a muchísima gente.
But the downside, extreme weather is making it hard to keep up.
Cada vez hay calores más fuertes y se nota cada vez más la falta de lluvia.
The farm can also lean on that grafting technique to help grow trees faster, so they can keep up with booming U.S. interest. But while they wait for what might come, they'll keep picking away, hoping for steady weather and a strong harvest.
Sí, porque esto nos da muchísimo trabajo a todos nosotros y la verdad nos sentimos muy orgullosos de que ustedes consuman el limón veracruzano y el limón mexicano.
Next, we go to Florida, where farmers have figured out how to keep growing edible oranges while battling a disease called citrus greening. In 2021, Florida had its worst orange crops since World War II. That's because this insect is waging a war on the state's valuable citrus trees.
So this tree is infected with citrus greening. It produces small, misshapen fruit. Just see the difference.
This disease can be a tree killer.
The insect spreads a disease called HLB, or citrus greening, and it's infected nearly every citrus grove in the state.
Less canopy, you can see there's just less foliage on the tree, you can see through the tree.
The oranges are still edible. The real problem is that citrus greening has slashed Florida's production by 78%. It's cost the state nearly $8 billion and driven many growers out of the industry.
You should go back in your mind 15 years to what this place once was. As a collection of varieties, this was full of beautiful green trees.
We've had freezes, hurricanes, but citrus greening has definitely been the most challenging issue we faced in my career.
This group of scientists is racing to find a cure, armed with some unique weapons.
This is about the size that we're going to put on most new trees now.
The researchers have helped growers produce oranges on the infected trees, but they haven't found a long-term solution yet.
We will have to live with the infected trees and just make the most out of them.
So can they keep this disease at bay before it wipes out the state's orange industry? We head to Florida to find out. Larry's a fifth-generation farmer in Fort Meade, Florida.
We've been growing citrus in my family since the 1850s. When I first started in the industry, citrus occupied over 900,000 acres in the state of Florida. In fact, some years we had too much fruit and market prices were depressed.
Just 15 years ago, his family packed 1 million orange cartons a year, mostly Valencia oranges, the big, sweet, juicy kind.
You planted a grove expecting that to last for multiple generations.
The first case of citrus greening was reported in China back in 1919. It quickly spread across the continent, devastating citrus groves in India and Saudi Arabia as well. No one knows exactly how the Asian citrus psyllid made it to Florida, but in 1998, it showed up on an orange jasmine plant in a backyard in Palm Beach County. And it quickly spread throughout the state on infected rootstocks. But it would take another 7 years before Florida's orange trees showed signs of greening.
It spreads throughout the state before you even know it's present.
And in 2005, Larry found his first infected tree.
It was a real challenge and an eye-opening for us. We knew what a threat it could be to our operation, and we were fearful there were more infected trees that just had not been detected.
At first, Larry tried removing all the sick trees, but the insect moved faster, soon infecting too many to control. When a psyllid munches on a citrus tree, it leaves behind the bacteria that causes greening, here in the vascular tissue. The bacteria replicates and blocks this important highway for removing nutrients. Underground, the root systems thin and die out. Above ground,
You notice the yellow pattern, the dark green spots.
If you can see me through the canopy of this tree, that means this tree is really, really sick.
while the trees do keep bearing oranges for a few years, the fruit essentially never ripens.
You see it's small in size, it remains green, and when I cut this fruit, you see an odd shape.
You can still eat the fruit, it's just not as sweet.
The
The orange juice from this fruit has lower sugar content or bricks than normal fruit, but there's nothing wrong with the juice. But it's awful.
And 40% of those oranges fall off the tree sooner than usual.
The bacteria is actually starving and kills the tree over time.
Today, researchers estimate 90% of all orange trees in the state have the bacteria.
No longer do you see citrus trees abundant in the landscape.
Larry has kept his trees alive and producing for 15 years, using a combination of horticultural techniques developed by scientists at the University of Florida.
Some of our work that is going on right now is finding ways to keep those trees that do have the disease still producing fruit that are usable.
You guys want to see what some psyllids look like? Yes. All right. So they're very small. Ooh, there's an escapee actually. They're small, they kind of jump around a little bit. So we use this thing called an aspirator, or the more fun term we use with children is pooter. We just suck them up. It's basically a little vacuum in my hand.
Here, Lauren Diepenbrock can study the psyllid's movement to learn what might keep them off a citrus tree.
Using the aspirator is actually a really efficient way to collect psyllids.
She's figured out a few things that detract psyllids. First, this pink clay. It's sprayed on the trees to hide the leaves from the insect, which uses light wavelengths to see. One study showed the clay was more effective than insecticides. The second thing Lauren is researching is these 8-foot wide sheets of plastic, called reflective mulch.
The idea is that it should make it where the psyllid can't find the host plant. It could be that it blinds them or causes a visual deterrent.
Has it worked?
Somewhat. We do get psyllids. We do get them, but we do get them at a reduced rate.
A few years ago, farmers discovered that putting plastic bags around baby trees could help them grow stronger before infection. Lauren's now studying how effective these individual protective covers, or IPCs, actually can be.
So this is IPC mesh, and as you can see, there's little holes in it. You can see my hand very clearly. Wind, sun, rain, it all gets through here. The goal is to really keep that Asian citrus psyllid off the tree. And then if you look underneath, this is our irrigation.
The baby trees will grow in the IPCs for 2 years.
So you can see that the trees aren't perfect. We're still gonna have some stuff on them. We do have some pest issues in here, but they look really good compared to what's in the open field. And this will actually give our trees a fighting chance once they're out in the environment, and they could potentially get infected with sea lice.
Scientist Tripti Vashish thinks the key is in the soil.
We have been learning that the trees need these nutrients to fight infection. The citrus trees, because of this disease, have very small roots or fewer roots, so they are not very efficient in picking up the nutrients. It's like a job of 10 people needs to be done by one person, same with the roots.
She figured out that giving smaller doses of fertilizer and water more frequently helps the sick roots absorb nutrients better.
And it's similar like us, 6 small meals each day rather than 3 big meals are better. Same as with the fertilizer and irrigation, smaller doses are better than big doses.
Larry uses fertilizer custom designed for his trees. He's also planting more young ones.
One of our strategies for dealing with greening is to plant the groves at higher densities. We're planting 300 trees per acre compared to 140 to 150 trees per acre before we were dealing with the disease.
So if he knows all the trees will get infected, with more planted, hopefully some will survive. Growers have also tried releasing predator wasps and spraying insecticides. While there's no silver bullet, in combination, these short-term solutions have sort of worked.
You can slow down the decline.
We've been battling citrus greening for 15 years, and while the industry's not thriving, we're definitely surviving.
But the problem is, all these approaches tack on an extra $600 per acre onto production costs for growers.
Our revenues are down by more than half on an individual grove basis.
Growers are losing money.
And many couldn't swallow the losses. By early 2022, half of Florida's orange growers had left the industry. So while he waits for a long-term solution, Larry's taking the hit so he can keep harvesting the same way his family always has. Workers quickly pick the oranges and drop them into bags. Once they've got a good batch, pickers dump them into baskets in the grove. Workers then truck the oranges to the packing facility just down the road.
We have 8 digital cameras that takes a picture of each piece of fruit as it travels through the packing line. We use an electronic sorter to divide the crop by color.
If they're orange enough, the fruit gets cleaned and hit with a layer of natural wax.
It preserves the fruit, it extends its shelf life.
Today, because of HLB, Larry packs half as many boxes as he did 17 years ago. If the oranges are a bit too green, Larry knows they'll be hard to sell on the fresh side. So he sends them to get juiced at the Florida's Natural plant in Lake Wales. Larry owns the juicing plant along with other local growers as part of the company's cooperative.
About 90% of the fruit grown in the state goes to orange juice.
But just like growers, the factory has been getting fewer oranges.
So less efficiency in the plant.
With a lower fruit volume, the factory had to shut down one of its 3 processing lines. Nowadays, 60,000 boxes of oranges arrive at the plant from cooperative farms across Central Florida. That's about 30,000 fewer than before HLB.
Within 24 hours of harvesting, we juice the fruit.
This machine squeezes the juice out of every orange.
We pull out any seeds, and we also collect the pulp where we can add that back to whatever degree we want to do that.
The juice gets pasteurized and then pumped into cartons. But remember, greening affects oranges' natural sugar content. So Florida's Natural has to blend infected oranges with sweeter ones from different regions or even seasons. It still tastes like orange juice, it's just not quite as sweet. Today, the factory pumps out about a third less than pre-greening.
They need a home for their fruit where they can get maximum value, that hopefully can sustain their operations until a solution to greening is found.
Many scientists believe the long-term solution lies with re-engineering nature, either genetically changing the bug itself or naturally breeding citrus trees.
Ultimately, a tree that's resistant or tolerant to the disease will be key.
That's the project Fred Gemitter and his team are working on at the University of Florida. They're trying to breed for an HLB-resistant orange variety, meaning even if the disease shows up, the tree won't get sick. To do that, he takes 2 different types of trees, maybe one with yummy oranges, and one that's resistant, and essentially has them mate. And their kid will hopefully still taste good, but won't get HLB.
That's really the holy grail of citrus screening research.
But that's not easy. Finding a resistant orange is like looking for a genetic needle in a haystack.
It's extremely difficult to breed new oranges.
We know of some kinds of trees related to oranges that are resistant, and we're trying to access the genetics of those resistant types by making crosses.
Fred says it could take more than a decade.
So it's long term. There's always an element of serendipity in this.
But armed with that miracle-resistant tree, they could be better prepared to tackle future diseases.
It's a global, interconnected world we live in. People and plant diseases move about pretty freely, and so there will be another problem, another disease come along.
I believe science will continue to deliver new tools that will make growing citrus easier over time. I look forward to those days. I'm sure we'll have other challenges that we'll face in time, but today citrus screening is here to stay.
Wild oyster populations around the world are plummeting. We head to Virginia to see how the Ward Oyster Company uses algae tanks to farm 3.5 million oysters every year.
This is John Vigliata. He began his career on the water when he was 13 years old.
I started putting oysters in cages in 1995.
This aquaculture farm sprawls over 884 acres, the size of over 147 Roman Colosseums. It includes a hatchery, nursery, and part of Virginia's Mobjack Bay. Farming an oyster begins in the hatchery. Here, biologist Chris Smith puts 3,000 adult oysters into a shallow tank called a spawning table. Then, he artificially creates the conditions that cause oysters to spawn.
We're controlling the temperature in the tank specifically. It's the all-you-can-eat buffet, getting them ready to spawn.
When the oysters spawn, they release their eggs and sperm directly into the water. The eggs and sperm are put into tanks, where they turn into oyster larvae. 1 billion oyster babies are produced in these tanks every year. They remain there for about 3 weeks, feeding on algae and growing shells.
We grow about 7 different species of algae to create a menu for our oysters and clams. It's amazing to see the algae kind of bloom and then to watch the oysters and clams grow in our facility. It's very gratifying.
When the oysters get to be about 1/4 inch long, they are placed outside in upweller tanks.
And it's a system in which allows a large quantity of water to be flown past the oysters, giving them a superabundant amount of food.
After about 2 months of feeding, staff check on the size of the oysters.
We'll take these oysters here that are larger and they'll go in a cage to go overboard, and then these oysters here will go back into the system for a further grow out to where they can get to be this size and eventually go in a cage.
The cages full of oysters are then tossed into the Mobjack Bay.
We have about 2,500 to 3,000 cages. Contained in all the cages that we have out in the Mobjack Bay, you probably have somewhere around 30 million oysters.
That is a lot of oysters. If all of them were harvested at once and put into your freezer, you could eat over 800 oysters every day for 100 years, and you would still have leftovers.
Nicely done.
Farmers monitor the weather closely. Excessive rainfall can dilute the salt in the water, which could kill the oysters. And water temperature is also a factor.
Oysters grow best between 60 degrees Fahrenheit and 80 degrees. If you go above that, it just gets so hot that they will stop growing or slow down significantly. If it goes below that, they go dormant.
If all goes well, after 6 months, the cages are removed from the water and the oysters are brought to a separator. This machine sorts them by size. If they are not big enough to sell, they go back in the water. Oysters can take around 1 to 2 years to go from hatchery to market. After separation, market-sized oysters are washed, tagged with order information, and boxed. Once the oysters come out of the bay, the clock starts ticking. The team has to harvest the oysters, transport them to the shop, add ice, package them, and place them in the cooler within 2 hours to meet FDA guidelines. The boxes are put into a refrigerated truck and shipped to distributors across the US, who pay around 40 cents per oyster. In Virginia, wild-caught oysters actually sell for less, around 30 cents.
We probably sell our market oysters to 10 or 15 different states in the country, but our oysters end up everywhere.
And occasionally, for local orders, John delivers himself.
Gotcha. And then you have the tag here.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
Customers say that they're fresh, they're delicious.
Since 1996, they've gone from farming 100,000 oysters per year to 3.5 million in 2019. Besides selling oysters to eat, the company also sells around 70 million baby oysters each year to farmers up and down the East Coast. Aquaculture is one of the fastest growing food production sectors in the world. While the amount of seafood caught in the wild has not increased by much since the 1980s, demand is up nearly 150%. Aquaculture is filling the gap. It is predicted that by 2030, 60% of the fish available for human consumption will come from aquaculture. Virginia has made a big bet and doubled down on farming oysters. Today, the state is the largest oyster producer on the East Coast. But the pandemic has hurt business.
Like no natural disaster that we've ever had.
Oysters' market value and restaurant orders plummeted.
So we're getting hit both with reduced orders and a reduced price for the product that we do sell.
And on top of that, after a stellar 2019, John stocked the bay hoping for an abundant future.
We have a record amount of product in the water and our sales are off almost 50%.
While 2020 was a roller coaster ride for Ward Oyster Company, sales have finally started to pick up. John is optimistic about the future. No matter what happens, he plans to be on the water.
I love being out on the water. My office is on the water. You can't get it much better than that. And salt water is in my veins.